Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big topics. And today, we are tackling one of the biggest scientific challenges of our time. Can we repair the aging brain? As more and more of us live longer, the race is on to see if we can not only slow down cognitive decline, but maybe, just maybe, even reverse it. Let's dive in.
Every 3 seconds. Get this. That's how often someone somewhere in the world develops dementia. It's a truly staggering statistic. This quiet crisis that experts predict is going to triple by the year 2050.
So, is this just inevitable? A tragic, unavoidable part of getting older that we just have to accept? Well, the science is increasingly saying no. But to find a solution, we first have to understand what's actually going wrong inside the brain as it ages.
Okay, so let's really get into this. To understand the sheer scale of the challenge, we have to start by looking at it from a personal perspective. Because this isn't just about numbers on a page. It's about real people.
For millions, just like the former BBC correspondent Rory Cellan-Jones, the diagnosis of a neurodegenerative disease like Parkinson's starts with these incredibly subtle signs: a slight tremor, maybe a little shuffle in their walk. These are progressive conditions, which means they get worse over time. But the story, it doesn't begin when we start seeing these symptoms.
Now here's where things get really interesting. To even begin to tackle this crisis, scientists are saying we have to totally rethink what dementia even means. Turns out, for decades, we've basically been looking at the problem completely backwards.
You see, experts are really clear on this now. Dementia isn't the disease itself. It's just an umbrella term for a whole collection of symptoms. It's what we see at the very, very end of a long process. Think of it like this. A fever is a symptom of an infection, right? It's not the infection itself. Dementia is the fever.
And this is the absolute crucial point. The damage we see in called dementia is really just the tip of the iceberg. The real diseases, we're talking Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, they don't just pop up out of nowhere when you get old. Nope, they start silently, decades earlier, often when we're in middle age.
This timeline just lays it all out so clearly, doesn't it? The disease process can kick off as early as our 40s. Then, maybe in our 50s, you start to get these subtle prodromal symptoms, little warning signs like changes in sleep or your sense of smell. It's only after age 65, when a huge number of brain cells have already died, that the clinical symptoms we all recognize as dementia finally show up. So, if the disease is starting that early, the single biggest challenge, the whole game really, becomes finding it before all that irreversible damage is done. And to do that, scientists need a completely new toolkit. I mean, the old way of diagnosing these things was, frankly, incredibly crude. A doctor might watch you walk down a hall or ask you to remember a list of words. It's all so subjective, and it almost always catches the disease way, way too late. The new approach? It's all about objective, measurable data. And that new toolkit? It's not science fiction anymore, it's here. We've got advanced PET scans that can literally see the toxic proteins building up in the brain. We have simple blood tests that can spot key markers with just stunning accuracy. And get this, genetic analysis can now predict someone's risk of developing Alzheimer's with about 80% accuracy, decades before symptoms appear. It's a total game changer. All this new science is also pointing to a key culprit, our own immune system. Researchers have identified this process called inflammaging. It's a low-level, chronic inflammation that builds as we get older. It makes the brain's dedicated cleanup crew less effective, and in some cases, it can even cause it to turn against the very brain cells it's supposed to protect. And it's not just about our internal biology. For a disease like Parkinson's, we now know that while genetics plays a role, a whopping 70% of the risk comes from our environment. Now, what does that mean? It means a lot of these factors are, at least in theory, things we can change.
Okay, so if we can find these diseases early, and we're starting to figure out what causes them, why on earth has the race for a cure been so painfully, frustratingly slow?
This quote from Rory Cellan-Jones just perfectly captures that frustration. A promising drug for Parkinson's took 16 years to go through clinical trials, only to fail at the last minute. And his story isn't an isolated one. It's pretty much the norm.
And a huge part of the problem comes down to this simple but shocking chart. There are 18 times more research publications on cancer than there are on neurodegeneration. That massive gap, well, it represents decades of underfunding and a difference in scientific focus that has left brain science lagging far behind.
On top of that, these diseases are just fundamentally harder to run trials for. The progression is really slow, so a trial has to last for years. And success isn't as clear-cut as shrinking a tumor.
The goal is to get patients to decline less, which is incredibly difficult to measure precisely.
But, and this is a big but, despite all these immense challenges, the feeling among scientists is that we are finally on the cusp of a real breakthrough. It just requires a different way of thinking about the problem, a long-term, collective vision.
And the first cracks of light are already shining through. New antibody drugs for Alzheimer's are the first ever to successfully target and remove the root cause, that toxic buildup of amyloid plaques in the brain. When they're given early enough, they can slow the disease and stabilize patients for years. It is the ultimate proof of concept. This disease can be modified.
The Alzheimer's researcher Bard de Strooper puts it perfectly. The effort is like building a medieval cathedral. The people who laid the first stones knew they would never see it finished, but they built it anyway, driven by the belief that a solution was possible and absolutely essential for future generations.
And that's the mindset shift we need. The science is finally ready. The tools for early detection exist, and the first drugs that can actually modify the disease are here. The path forward now requires the funding, the collective will, and the societal investment to build that cathedral. The question is no longer if we can solve this, but if we are ready to begin.